Hi, this is Simon from Tokyo Productions and welcome back to part 3 of this Cosmic Energy Orb tutorial for Motion 5. Now normally in these tutorials I try to avoid using any third-party images or movies, but I'm going to make an exception in this case, and that's because it's something I've created myself and it's been created in Motion, so let me bring it in. You'll find a download link for this in the comments section, so you can grab it yourself. I've turned off the camera so it doesn't interfere with things, and I'm going to pull it in. It's called Hawaii Flare. Drag it into a new group. You'll see it's this animated lens flare. Now, in theory you could make this yourself, but it is pretty complicated, and it was a test render that I created for a lens flare plugin that never ended up getting released. But anyway, it's yours to download and use in this project or any other project of your choosing. So we've brought that in. First thing I'm going to do is I just want to use a freeze of this. So I'm going to come to the library command 2, come to behaviors, and I'll come to retiming, and I'll grab the hold frame behavior. And that'll just give me a freeze. And then I'm going to select the flare rather than the behavior there, and come to 10 frames on the timeline and hit O, just to chop it off to 10 frames long. Then I'm going to come to the library, command 2, filters, blur, and I'm going to select a zoom blur. I'm going to add it to that layer. And then F3 for the inspector, and let's increase the amount to 15. And the point of this is that we don't really want this to look like a lens flare, more like some kind of energy burst. What we also need to do is we need to add a mask so we don't see the edges of the frame. So I'm going to hit Alt-C for the circle mask tool. I'm going to start in the top left hand corner and I'm going to drag out a mask that covers most of the frame like that. Let's just center it up by hitting the reset button there. F4 for the mask controls, and let's just feather that in -250. Then we'll select the flare itself, and what we want to do is we want to come down and change its blend mode to linear dodge. Okay, so now we want to make it just flash, and to do that I'm going to come back to the library, command 2, filters, color correction, and I'm going to look for Open EXR Tone Map, and I'm going to add that to that layer. F3 for its controls. I'm going to come to frame 2, and I'm going to set an exposure keyframe. Let's give it a value of 4. Let's come to the first frame and let's give it a value of -6. Finally, let's come back to frame 10 and set the value down to -10. And let's just solo this layer to see what we've done. So we've created that little flash effect. But I think I'm not entirely happy with this. I think it's still looking a little bit too much like a lens flare. So I'm going to come to the library, command 2, look for filters, distortion, and I'm going to come down and grab fisheye. And I'm going to add it just below the zoom blur. It doesn't want to go down. Let me force it down. There we go. F3 for the controls. Okay, so I'm going to set a fisheye amount of -15, and that's giving me this much more interesting looking effect. And then I'm going to drag the X center along until I get something that's like that. It's much more like some kind of strange caustic element. So that's about -650 there. And then I think we can increase the zoom blur amount. Let's go for 30. Right, let's unsolo everything, so that's Control-Shift-S, and I'm going to turn the camera back on, but I'm going to leave clouds, particles and orb turned off because they are going to slow us down a bit. So let's hit F1 for the flare position. Let's make sure we've got the flare layer selected, and I'm going to come to 15 frames on the timeline and hit Shift /bracket. And that will just move that element to 15 frames. Very handy little shortcut that saves you having to drag it. And now let's change the Z position for this layer. So I'm going to choose -1500 and see where that gets us. So if we just scrub through there, you'll see that that now flashes through at that point. Let's just turn on the overlays, Command / and maybe just bring it down a bit, down to the bottom left-hand corner. Okay, that's cool. Let's duplicate this layer, Command D, and let's come to about 1 second 10 frames, and again hit Shift / to move it. And then we can just have a look at where that's taking us. I think what we need to do is come back to the Z position, and again let's just bring it closer to camera. Let's set a position of 0 on Z, and this time let's drag it over somewhere like that. Maybe just really want to kind of have some variation in how these are working. So let's duplicate that again, Command D, and again I've moved to about 2 seconds and 3 frames there, and I'm going to hit Shift / to move it again. See where that is. Okay, so again we want to introduce some variation. Let's again flip it around. Let's maybe do that, and again let's adjust its Z position. Let's go for 2000 on Z there, and have it hanging off that bottom right hand corner. How are we doing? That's not too bad. As we hit 3 seconds, we're going to be starting to bring in our orb. So what I want to do is have a couple of really quick ones at this point. So I'm going to come to 214, and I'm going to duplicate it again. And again hit Shift / So again let's do rotation and F1 again. And let's bring it right in, 4000, like that. And let's duplicate it again, Command D, and where it's 2 seconds and 16 frames, that's probably quite a good point. And let's just move that one, Shift / just move him forward a little bit, and change that position and angle, just sort of echoing that down at the bottom here. Again, let's move it down to something like that. Perhaps bring it up in frame so we've got it like that. Let's just run that from the top. So you can see those two little flashes there. They kind of add to the energy just at the end there, and should help us get into the transition. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with those flashes. Let's move on and add the lens flares themselves. First of all, let's rename this group Flashes, and we'll make a new group just above it, Command-Shift-N, and call this Flares. And let's just grab one of these elements here and drag it into that Flares group. And we'll take that last one. First of all, let's come to its transform here and just reset that, hitting the reset button, because obviously we've got all sorts of interesting values in there which you don't necessarily want. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that hold frame behavior, and then I'm going to come to the first frame and hit Shift / and that will move that flare to the beginning. And then I'm going to come to 4 seconds on the timeline, and I'm going to hit O, and that will extend it out to be 4 seconds long. And I also need to remember to remove that OpenEXR tone map filter, which is obviously fading that in and out, so I'll delete that. And I think what we need to do is just move it closer to the camera, so let's set a value of 5000 on Z, and that should just, as we start to hit 3 seconds, it'll give us that nice transition, hopefully through there and into our orb. Then I'm going to duplicate that, Command D, and F1 for its transform here. I'm going to set the Z position to -1000, and that's going to give me this initial kickoff like that, and just to get us going. So I think I'll come to about somewhere like that, 2 and 8 frames, and hit O on the keyboard. Then I'll hit Command 2 for the library, behaviors, basic motion, fade in, fade out, and apply that. F2 for the controls there, set a fade in time of 0 and a fade out time of about 12, I think. So that'll give us a nice flash at the start. And I think what I want to do is come to F1, come down to timing here, and I'll set that speed up to 200% down here in the timing speed field. That'll just give us a more energetic burst as we get going. So I think that's our flares sorted out. I want to come to 3 seconds on the timeline. And let's close up flares, let's turn on flashes and close that up. Let's turn everything back on, clouds, particles and orb. And the orb, I think I just want to have it start to come in just at this point. Because we don't want to be too close to it. It'll look a bit fuzzy and ragged. So I'm going to select the orb group and I'm going to hit I here at 3 seconds. And that's going to give us the effect of it bursting in just at that point. And I think that should work. Maybe let's come back just because of that lens flare there. Maybe we're better off at 219. Let's have a look at that. Yep, that seems to work better. So 219, and that seems to join up quite nicely with the orb coming in. And the other little bit of tidying up I need to do is I need to come to 4 seconds and just need to tidy up the clouds. So I'm going to select the clouds at that point, hit O on the keyboard, again hit Command 2 for the library, behaviors, basic motion, fade in, fade out. Add that to the clouds group and hit F2. Fade in time of 0. Let's set a fade out time of 12. And that'll just take care of those clouds disappearing and they'll just nicely blend in. So here's a quick RAM preview just so we can check the state of play. The particles are obviously far too large. And there aren't enough of them, I don't think, and they're too colourful, so 3 things to fix there. The other thing to fix is that there's a little bit of a kick on the Y position as the camera goes back. So let's just fix that first of all, because we've got another element yet to introduce. So let's come back to the camera and hit Command 8 for the keyframe editor. And let's just Alt-click on the Y position. And here I'm just going to select, for that first keyframe, I'm going to select Ease Out. And that should just gently ease off on that movement into that keyframe, so we don't get that kick. Command 8 to close the keyframe editor. So the final element that we need to generate is something that more closely resembles this core as we shoot back. Because at the moment we don't really have anything that looks like that in our opening sequence. And to do that we're going to make another new group. So Command Shift N, and I'm going to call this one Caustics. And I'm going to come to the library, Command 2, Generators, and I'm going to select Caustics and bring it into that group and hit F1. And we'll hit the reset button just to tidy everything up. Okay, let's start by turning the camera off and turn off the other groups just so they don't interfere with us just while we're working. Let's come to frame 12 and let's hit O to abbreviate the caustics so they just run for those 12 frames. First of all, I want to come to the library, Command 2, Behaviors, Basic Motion, Fade in, Fade out, and I'm going to apply that. So F2, and we'll set a fade in of 2 frames and a fade out of 8 frames. Then I want to come to the library, Command 2. I want to come to Filters, and I want to come to Distortion, and I want to select Polar, and I want to apply that. And that gives us our familiar circular caustics element. Then I want to come down to the tiling category here, still under Filters, And I want to grab random tile, and I'm going to add that above polar. And you'll see what that does. That creates this really interesting complex texture, which I'm really starting to like a lot. So let's hit F3 to come to these filter controls. The polar we can leave just as it is, but let's increase the radius for the random tile up to 475. So we get a looser fabric. And then I'm going to reduce the mix down to 35%. So we still see a little bit of that original Caustics texture. So hit F4 to come to the Caustics controls and click on the color swatch, and we'll just make it this dark blue, maybe go for darker still. And we just want to hit F1 so we can come to its blend mode, and we'll set that to add. Now we don't want this reaching all the way to the edges of the screen, otherwise we'll be seeing a rectangle. So we need to again add a mask, so Alt-C for the circular mask. Start at the top left hand corner, drag out a circular mask like that, zero it up, hit F4 for its controls, and we'll just set a feather of -300. -300. And that just softens off all the edges. Okay, now let's turn the camera back on again, and I'll also turn on clouds. And we need to adjust the position of this layer so it's in frame. So let's hit F1 again so we can come to its Z position. I need to set that to -1750, so it's moved back into the path of the camera, and that's looking pretty good. We could just adjust it to taste on X and Y. I think that's really fairly good as it is. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to build up various layers of this like we did with the clouds and the flashes. So you probably don't need to see me doing that. It's just a question of duplicating the element, moving on down the timeline and positioning it where you want till we've got to about 3 seconds, when the orb itself will take over. So here's a quick RAM preview of that so we can check where we've got to. The main thing we now need to do is fix those particles, which are looking very clunky indeed, as I'm sure you'll agree. So let's close up that Caustics group and let's come down to the Particles group and select the Blurry Sparks emitter. The first thing we want to do is calm down and reduce the scale, and I think I'm going to reduce it down to 40%. And let's increase the initial number up here to 3000. So there you go, that's got a lot more particles in there. It's looking pretty nice. What you'll notice up here, let me zoom in on that so you can see very clearly, is that motion blur is not really working quite right. So I'm going to hit Command J to come to the project properties. And down here we have control over the motion blur. We just need to increase these samples. So I think I'm going to go up to 16. And you can see that that's improved the smoothness of that result. Obviously, the higher the samples, the more it's going to tax your system in terms of rendering. So I would just adjust that at the last minute before you render. So let's very quickly add some text, make a new group, Command-Shift-N. We want to make this group 2D so it's not influenced by the camera. And then we'll hit T for the text tool and F7 for the HUD. Let's set the color to be something that we pick off our scene, something like that. And I want to go for a font called Korataki, which I rather like. I'm just going to increase the size a bit, maybe to about 60. And I'm going to type Cosmic Energy. Just want to center it up so the alignment is centered. F1 for its properties here, zero it out on X, and then I'm going to bring it down on Y till it sits there. And then I just want to come to 4 seconds and 20 frames on the timeline, and I hit I, and then Command 2 for the library, behaviors, basic motion, fade in, fade out, add that. F2 for the inspector, zero out the fade out time, set a fade in time of 12. And that'll just fade in as the orb is settling down. Now you could really make a complete mess of this design and come over to Appearance and turn on 3D text, and there's all sorts of abominations you could throw at it. And I think you'll agree, if you've got any taste or discrimination at all, that that looks absolutely horrible. 3D text is not something you want to be going anywhere near if you want to create tasteful design. So let's turn that off. So this project is now pretty much good to go as is. There's just one final element if you're interested in sticking around for it, and that's that I wanted to have a look at creating some sparking electric elements that are firing off from out of the center and hitting the inside edge of the orb. So I'm going to make a new project in order to do that, so that's Command N, and this one is 1920 1080, 24 frames a second and 10 seconds long as before. And what we're going to do first of all is hit B for the Bezier tool and F7 for the HUD, and we want outline of white and a width of 1. Turn off the fill, and we're going to click up here and then click and drag, just so we've created a wavy line like that, and then we'll hit return, and then we'll come over to its transform and reset it. Then we'll hit F4 for the shape controls, close down the HUD. Down here under outline, for the brush type, we're going to select airbrush, and I'm going to set the spacing to 150. Let me just turn off the overlays so you can see what's happened there. We've now got dots instead of a solid line. And then we're going to come over to the stroke controls here, and here under stroke color mode we're going to select color over stroke, and we're going to twirl open that gradient, and we'll take this tab here and we'll set its location to be 50%, so that's in the middle, and this right hand one here we'll set to be our darker blue, and then we'll move it in a little bit, and we'll hold down the Alt key and move it to the corresponding position on the other side. So now you'll see we've got a line that's brighter in the middle and darker on the edges. So we'll come back to the Style tab, and what I want to do is animate the first and last point offsets. So I'm going to click on first point offset and then right click, add parameter behavior, randomize, and I'm going to set the amount to 60%, and if we look what happens with that, we've now got the line shooting up and down. So I'm going to duplicate that randomized behavior and apply it to the object shape outline last point offset, and we're going to set the apply mode to subtract. And now we've got it happening at both ends. What we need to do is click a few times on the random seed for this new one that we've added, so that these are happening in different ways. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the library, Command 2, look for filters, distortion, and I'm going to scroll all the way down and look for underwater, and I'm going to apply it to that Bezier and hit F3 for the underwater controls. And I'm also going to duplicate that underwater, so Command D, and what I want to do is simply set the size of the second instance to 1.5, and that's giving me this crazy jiggling shape. It's exactly what I want, to create some kind of electric energy. Then I'm going to take the group itself and I'm going to select fixed resolution, and I'm going to come back to the library, filters, blur, I'm going to apply zoom blur to that group, and I'm also going to come to distortion, and I'm going to come down and look for ring lens and apply that above the zoom blur, and then hit F3 for the controls here. I'm going to set the zoom blur amount to 10, and then I'm just going to make a few adjustments to the ring lens. So I'm going to set its radius to 400 and its thickness to 0.23, and I just want to adjust that refraction down to 0.52, and then if we play that, you can see what that ring lens is doing. It's creating where the animation is hitting the edge of the circle, it's as though it's repelling from the edge. What we just need to do there though is add a circular mask so it tidies up everything beyond that edge. So let's hit Alt-C and then hit Shift and Alt, and from the center we'll draw out a circular mask like that. Hit F1 and center it up by hitting the reset button, and we can just come to the scale here and very slightly scale it in. I like to leave a little bit of that stray material so we're getting a sort of double edge, and that's looking quite good. What I might do is take this Bezier and duplicate it, Command D, F1 for its transform, and let's just come here and let's rotate it. Let's go for 150. And then just come back to its behaviors, F2, and let's click on those random seeds a bit so we get different behavior for this duplicate. And you can see this has created this very lively electric texture. So what we're going to do is render that out. So share, export movie, we're going to select ProRes 4x4, and we'll save that out, and we'll call it Energy Orb Electricity, and save that. So now we're back in our main comp, and I'm going to come over and look for Energy Orb Electricity that we've just rendered out, and I'm going to drag it into the orb group just above outer. And we can probably just about see it there. And if I hit F1 for its transform here, let's scale it up to 127, just so it's reaching the edges of the orb. I'm going to come over to the library, Command 2, I'm going to look for filters, blur, and I'm going to grab channel blur, and I'm going to add it to the layer, and hit F3 for the inspector. I'm going to turn off everything except blue, and just crank up that channel blur just a little bit. And what that's done is it's just blurred that blue channel, made it all sit in rather better. So then I'm going to duplicate this layer, Command D, and hit F1 and set its blend mode to add, and then come back to the library, Command 2, filters, color correction, and I'm going to grab OpenEXR tone map, and I'm going to add it to that layer above the channel blur, and hit F3, and I'm going to really crank up the exposure all the way up to 10, and then I'm going to hit Alt-C to create a mask, Shift and Alt to constrain it and drag it out like that, and reset it. And now what that's given me is a brighter version in the middle. Hit F4 for the mask, just a very slight inward feather of about -20. And then if we do a RAM preview of that, you'll see we've got a pretty nice electric effect that really adds just that little bit of something to this final result. So let's take a look at the completed scene. So I'm sorry that's taken a good long time to get to that end result, and now that we've got there are plenty of things that I would still want to change, but hopefully you've seen a few interesting techniques along the way and can create something nice yourself. So thanks very much indeed for watching, and I hope to see you again on the next one.